Who am I speaking to right now? Is it a college student dabbling in theory? A psychology graduate student dismayed by the standard approaches to psychological care? The lifelong learner with a voracious appetite for challenging the mind? Perhaps the seasoned Lacan scholar who's here to either further deepen their knowledge or to achieve some self-satisfaction for knowing more than me? All that and much more may be part of my imaginary construction of you, my audience. And who do I think is speaking to you? A college professor? A white male? An older YouTuber? Perhaps something else is going on here under the veneer of appearances. Another discourse behind the discourse. Maybe behind my imaginations of who I think I'm addressing. I'm in fact addressing a different other. And what is this other saying to me? Perhaps it's telling me that this is how I'll finally achieve the acceptance I've long sought for. And perhaps the other is also telling me that my videos are shit, that I'm wasting my time, that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And who is this subject that I am who's addressing this other? It's something split between the self I think I am and what the other is saying to me. I am nothing but this double alienation of the ego and the other's discourse. So anyway, hi Dad. Please subscribe. This is Thought in Motion, a series dedicated to the seminars of psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. Today's video covers lectures 18 and 19 in seminar 2. Today we ask the following questions. 1. What is Schema L? 2. How does my desire define me? 3. Who is the big other? And 4. Why does language prevent me from accessing this big other? What I attempted to demonstrate with the beginning of this video is something like Schema L, which Lacan introduces in these lectures. Schema L is a diagram consisting of two axes. On the first, we have the imaginary relation between ego, symbolized by the letter A, standing for the French word for other, autre, and the specular other, symbolized by A prime. We typically consider ourselves and our relation to others along this imaginary axis. It's who I think I am and who I think I'm talking to right now. On the other axis, we discover a different relation occurring at the level of the symbolic between the subject and what Lacan names here the big other. The subject is symbolized by the S, and it's alongside the German S, meaning the word it, which Freud uses for what in English has been translated as the id. This equating the subject with the id is something I've mentioned previously and comes up again here. The id, le soi in French, is for Lacan the symbolic it beyond the imaginary ego. It's what is in need of recognition. Then there is the other, symbolized by a capital A, again for autre, but this time referring to le grand autre, the big other. I'll say much more about this big other shortly, but important to keep in mind for the moment is that operative beneath our everyday conversations is the discourse of the big other, a discourse that forms the unconscious. Freud is often presented as a theoretician of the mind, offering an abstract set of ideas difficult to relate to. However, for Lacan, this is a misunderstanding that does not recognize how the Freudian experience begins in positing a world of desire. And it is desire that is the key to understanding ourselves and understanding the phenomenon of mental illness. Desire provides the primitive structuration of our world. It constitutes our thinking about ourselves, our experiences, and even the entire domain of philosophy, Lacan says, which is a rather provocative statement. This powerful and subversive force should not be confused with biological needs. Whereas the instincts are defined in terms of their objects, desire is not. Instead, desire is a relation to a lack. But a lack of what? This is where Lacan makes an interesting move, saying that this lack is the lack of being itself. This lack of being, however, is the very thing, or the very nothing, that allows being to come into existence and to achieve a sense of self. Now, what does this mean? Lacan seems to be evoking a kind of Hegelian dialectic here, of course mediated through Kojève, in which one achieves a self-consciousness from the other who is not me. In the case of being, its other is the lack of being. So being becomes aware of itself as existing in its relation to this lack of being. However, we have to be cautious here and not mistake this awareness with the kind of self-transparent consciousness of the modern subject who reflexively accesses its thoughts. What I become self-conscious of is the fact that I am a being that lacks, a manque à être. To put it as Augustine does in the Confessions, mihi quaestio factus sum, I have become a question to myself. And if I do not recognize the enigma that I am, and especially the enigma of my desire, then I do not know myself. It's this situation that evokes the fundamental question, do I exist or not? To be or not to be? The symptoms of the obsessional neurosis are a particular response to this fundamental question, whereby one incessantly works to justify one's existence. Now, this discussion on desire and lack may seem at first disconnected with Schema L. So to understand the connection, we have to move on to our next question. We've already discussed in previous videos the importance of naming desire and its speech where desire expresses itself and can be recognized. The naming of desire is not about identifying a desire that was always already there. Rather, naming creates the desire, bringing it into existence within the world. However, this is not the end of the story, as there are a few complications that arise now. First, speech can never articulate the whole truth of desire. There always remains a surplus that exceeds speech. Second, the recognition of desire in speech requires addressing the one to whom the subject is subjected to. I am only a speaking subject because the big other has spoken to me first. And when I utter true or full speech, it's always unknowingly directed at this other to whom I am subjected. This is a relation with a fundamental alterity rather than a mirror image. Alterity here means an otherness or foreignness from consciousness. It's something completely outside of the imaginary relation and cannot be assimilated through identification. The big other is inscribed in the symbolic and is closely related to language and the law, and it's the locus of all speech. Finally, it is the unconscious, leading to one of Lacan's famous maxims that the unconscious is the discourse of the other. So what does this mean, the unconscious is the discourse of the other? The subject is constituted in part by the messages it receives from the other in the same way as the purloined letter constitutes each of the characters. But the letter has a life of its own, a certain logic, but whose contents remain inaccessible to us. So the unconscious is not something internal to us. Instead, the unconscious is an exteriority. We don't become speaking subjects through some spontaneous gesture of the mind. We receive language by being spoken to, and thereby inheriting the capacity of speech. However, the unconscious does not then just go on by itself after language is installed. The big other insists through our speech as it is spoken within our ongoing relations to other others. And this forms the basis for what in psychoanalysis is called transference. That is, the repetition of the other's discourse with others. Unconscious desire then emerges through this discourse. Another famous maxim of Lacan that we've mentioned before is that desire is a desire of and from the other. When Lacan introduced this maxim in Seminar 1, I had the sense that he was speaking strictly of the imaginary other. However, it seems the other referred here increasingly becomes the big other, who is both the one who teaches me to desire and what I desire, which is not just a desire for the big other, but is a desire for the other's desire. Yet, despite this ongoing relation to the big other, I never end up reaching the other except in a distorted form, ending up instead with little o others. As Lacan puts it, I always aim at true subjects, and I have to be content with shadows. Why is it that the big other is fundamentally unreachable? This brings us to our fourth question for today. What prevents me from reaching the big other, Lacan names the wall of language. Language is not synonymous with the symbolic order. Though language establishes us in our relation to the big other, it's also what prevents us from understanding this other. There's an imaginary dimension to it. A prominent example of this is the subject's identification with the ego, le moi, the me, which is grammatically used as the object of a verb. There's a tendency for the subject to identify with this object, to see oneself in terms of this imaginary me. This is somewhat reminiscent of Nietzsche's statements on the effects of language, such as where he writes in Twilight of the Idols, language sees doers and deeds all over. It believes that will has causal efficacy. It believes in the I as being, in the I as substance, and it projects this belief in the I substance onto all things. This is how it creates the concept of thing in the first place. In other words, language has this calcifying dimension to it. And this is the wall of language, which we see here illustrated when the arrow going from the big other, which is the unconscious, the discourse of the other, when this arrow meets up with the imaginary relation of ego and little other. And as a result, the discourse is distorted, symbolized by the change from the solid line to a dotted line. The subject takes up this distorted discourse and brings it into their relations with the little other, who then becomes the source of my identifications as an ego. And we can see here that all arrows stop at the ego. And I think this may mean that the ego is the freezing of the discourse altogether. I'm not quite sure at the moment what the arrow going from the big other to the ego means, but perhaps we'll get an answer to that at some point. So Schema L offers a model for thinking about psychoanalysis. In Lecture 18, Lacan states that efficacious analysis teaches the analysand to name their desire into existence. But to do this, the analyst must be positioned on the other side of the wall of language, inhabiting the symbolic plane with as little of their ego interfering as possible. Such interference by the analyst's ego is the principal reason for resistance. I think this is exemplified by the fact that the arrow goes from the little other to the ego. So if the analyst positions themselves as an ego, they then just represent another source of identification that further solidifies who the ego is. Progress in analysis comes then in the progressive displacement of this imaginary relation and the subject's gradual assumption of the discourse of the other. To become conscious of one's relation with the big other, who, behind the specular others, is the true but unrecognized interlocutor and the origin of our desire. I'd like to especially thank Clinton Vanderwalt for becoming a new supporter of this channel on Patreon, adding to the support provided by other Patreons listed here. You can also support this work on Patreon. The link is below in the description. And if you would like to support this work in other ways, you can by liking and sharing this video as well as subscribing to my channel.